Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about America's new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He was formerly a senator from Florida. He challenged Donald Trump in the primaries in 2016, and there was a lot of heated discussions between them. And subsequently, we know that he lost, but it came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people that he was nominated by Donald Trump to be his Secretary of State the second time round. And surprisingly, Marco Rubio, a well-known neocon, became the most normal of all of Donald Trump's appointees, and therefore he really sailed through his hearing and was unanimously voted by the Senate 99-0 as the next Secretary of State of the United States. So in this conversations, I'm going to try and unpack his ideology, his values, and what his political views are and what his political positions are. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to make general remarks about what we already know about Marco Rubio from watching him in the US Senate and during his presidential campaigns, his failed presidential campaigns. And so during the campaign, he has had an opportunity to address foreign policy issues. So we know more or less where he fits in. He is a typical neoconservative when it comes to American foreign policy. But we'll talk about that. But I'm also going to focus a little bit on his Senate testimony for the hearing. So his opening remarks give us some idea about what he thinks about the world and what he thinks is America's role in this world. So I'm going to talk about Marco Rubio in these two contexts. But before that, do subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. So the first thing that I want to basically say is to describe him, as the title of the show itself says, Marco Rubio is pro-India, anti-China, pro-Israel, and surprisingly, a revisionist. He hates the existing global order. He wants to destroy the existing global order and replace it with one which is kind of nebulous, and we'll talk about that in the second part of this discussion. So the first thing, how do we know that he is pro-India? I must also let you know that not all of these people are ideologically consistent. Marco Rubio is a neocon when it comes to foreign policy, but he's also a very strong Christian conservative. And so one element of his foreign policy is trying to advocate for Christian minorities overseas. And so in several occasions, he has taken very strong positions against countries where he has seen freedom of religion curtailed. And so he was anti-China because of China's suppression of Christians and Muslims. And we'll talk about that. But let me just finish by saying that he has also been very critical of India's treatment of Christians in the past. But even though in the past couple of years, he has become one of India's biggest supporters in the US Senate. What he did in July of last year, this is before we even knew that he was a contender for being the Secretary of State, he tried to elevate India to the status of a NATO country. So he introduced a bill in the Senate to treat India as the US would treat. So basically, he called this US-India Defense Act, and he wants the US to treat India as an ally, as it treats NATO allies, as it treats Japan, as it treats South Korea, with whom the US has military alliances. So he wants to elevate by law, not through treaty. This is interesting. So it's like a unilaterally treating India as an ally, even though India has not agreed to get into any military alliance with the US so far. So he's trying to use the law as a substitute to treaties to elevate the status of India to that of an ally. And in fact, in his first meeting, or rather in the readout that the State Department put out after the first meeting of the Quad, as well as his first bilateral meeting, which was with Dr. Jaishankar, he has referred to India as an ally. Ally is a technical term. Yes, it does mean that we are allied with and have similar interests, but ally means that you have a military pact with. So that's one indication of his pro-India position. The second thing that he did was his first act as Secretary of State was to have a bilateral meeting with Dr. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, and then subsequently he met with the Quad, the foreign ministers of the Quad, Foreign Minister of Japan, Australia, and India, and the statements are very sympathetic to India, and so it is very clear that he is quite pro-India, but he's also very anti-China, and one could argue that part of his pro-India position is anti-China. One thing that I would like to see as an Indian American is the United States treating India on its own and not looking at India through the lens of China. In the past, the United States used to look at India through the lens of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and now it's looking at India through the lens of China and the strategic imperatives that the US has vis-a-vis China. So I hope that India is dealt with on its own merit. And that is a kind of an important thing. And talking about Pakistan in that particular bill that Marco Rubio introduced, the bill hasn't passed, it hasn't become a law. In that, he also said that all assistance, military and otherwise, to Pakistan will be cut off if Pakistan directly attacks or harms India or supports anti-India terrorism. So it was really a very sympathetic and pro-India bill that he had introduced. He is very anti-China in his statements, and even in the final statement after the meeting in the Quad, he basically warned China to behave itself. And he's the first Secretary of State who has already been sanctioned by China. So I think a few years ago, as a retaliatory measure, China sanctioned him. And so he can't basically go to China. It would be interesting. Trump has expressed a very strong interest to go to China. And I guess China might lift its sanctions on Marco Rubio if Trump wants to go there. Or it might be even more interesting if Trump goes to China without Marco Rubio. We'll see what happens with that. So Marco Rubio has been instrumental in taking very strong measures against China. And of course, he is an extremely pro-Israeli person. During various campaigns, he has been one of the biggest recipients of money from AIPAC and other pro-Israeli political lobbies. Being pro-Israel is a very expensive. If you want somebody's pro-Israel positions in politics, you have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so Marco Rubio did manage to get a lot of money from the Israeli lobby for his pro-Israeli positions. So you can see from the amount of funding that he's received, he's one of the most, shall we say, one of the persons in the US government who has received the most money from the pro-Israeli lobbies. Of course, the champion of that is Joe Biden. I'm a Zionist president of the United States. So these are some of the characteristics of Marco Rubio. He is pro-India, at least. He's anti-China, and he is pro-Israel. He tends to occasionally make Islamophobic comments. I will point out to one in his statement. So the first thing he said in his opening remarks is that he admires the world order that the US created after World War II. But he opposes the world order that the US created after the Cold War. So if you look at these statements, I'm taking this, I'm cutting, pasting it from his statement that he used as opening remarks for his hearing. He says, in the decades that followed the global order they created served us well. For Americans, incomes rose and communities flourished. Alliances emerged in the Indo-Pacific and Europe that led to the emergence of stability, democracy, and prosperity in these regions, and prevented a cataclysmic Third World War. And ultimately, a wall in Berlin came down, and with it, an evil empire. So basically, he said that he approves of the world order that the United States created during the Cold War. And he clearly saw huge benefits to the US and to Western allies and even to the world from that order. But then, to the post-Cold War order that happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, this is what he had to say. Out of the triumphalism of the end of long Cold War emerged a bipartisan consensus that we had reached the end of history. He's referring to Francis Fukuyama's infamous article, that all the nations of Earth would become members of the democratic Western-led community. that a foreign policy that served the national interest could now be replaced by one that served the liberal world order, and that all mankind was now destined to abandon national identity and we would become one human family and citizens of the world. So this liberal kumbaya vision of the world, that's how he characterized the efforts of the United States since 1991. He perhaps forgot the fact that the United States invaded Iraq twice since 1991, broke international laws, tortured people. We have Abu Ghraib, we have Guantanamo, we have the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, just to point out for a few things. And one of the dark histories of the United States, the global war on terror, where lots and lots of American and liberal values are violated. Apparently, he has amnesia about all of that, but he sees this period as an effort by the United States and he dislikes that. He calls it a dangerous fantasy. He says this is a dangerous fantasy. And he clearly feels that it has done great harm to the United States. And I'll show you how he characterizes the impact of the post-Cold War order on the United States and the rest of the world. I wonder if Marco Rubio realized while he was writing that, and I'm sure he must have read it, showed it to lots of experts as well as his staff, that he was saying that he likes what America does in a bipolar system, and he does not like what America does in a unipolar system. So he did not like the consequences of a unipolar system, which has existed since 1991. So does he realize that he prefers a world order in which there is a peer competitor to the United States and constrains the US ability to shape the whole world? I don't think so. I don't think he's that smart or that deep to realize that he prefers the US to be in a bipolar system rather than a unipolar moment. In fact, he's clearly unhappy with what the US has done in his few years of, or 2 or 3 decades of unipolarity. He does not believe in free trade anymore. So one of the consequences of the post-1991 collapse of the Soviet Union was the creation of the globalized economy. He says, here in America and in many of the advanced economies across the world, an almost religious commitment to free and unfettered trade at the expense of our national economy shrunk the middle class, left the working class in crisis, collapsed industrial capacity, and pushed critical supply chains into the hands of adversaries and rivals. So he does not believe in this free trade that was heavily promoted by the new liberal politics introduced by Bill Clinton and subsequently pursued by both the Bushes and also Barack Obama and Joe Biden. So basically he says that this whole free trade commitment. So he does not believe in free trade. That's interesting. And then he says, comes up with another consequence of the unipolar moment, which is maximum freedom of movement. So he comes out as anti-immigration and also quite clearly Islamophobic. So this is what he says in his testimony. An irrational zeal for maximum freedom of movement of people has resulted in a historic mass migration crisis here in America and around the world that threatens the stability of societies and governments. I don't think people are able to move freely because there is free movement. In fact, people are running away from crises often created by the West. For example, the millions of Iraqis who ran away were because of US invasion of Iraq. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of Afghans that you see all over the world is the result of the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan by the United States, and similar Western interventions in Syria and Libya and other places have triggered huge mass migration to the West. And they're not going there freely. It's difficult. There are lots of perils, lots of people die, etc. But nevertheless, there has been mass migration and he hates it. And guess why he hates it? He says, and across the West, as a result of this mass migration, governments now censor and even prosecute domestic political opponents, while radical jihadists openly march in the streets and drive vehicles into our people. Of course, there are some radical Muslims. There's one nutcase born and brought up in America who grew up in American schools, was in the American army for 10 years, went on tour duties in Afghanistan, and then he drove his car and killed people in New Orleans just in this month, in this year. So yes, there are people like that in Europe too. But the thousands and thousands of people who are marching in the streets in the West and in Europe, they're all critical of America's foreign policy in the Middle East, America's uncritical support for Israel, and what Israel did in Gaza. He's calling all of them jihadis. First of all, not all of them are Muslims. Many of them are Jews. Most of them are Westerners. And some of them are indeed Muslims who've migrated here for various reasons. But he calls them all radical jihadis. And this is where we get a peek into his Islamophobic instincts. I must also point out that he has not mentioned Proud Boys or all the neo-Nazis who marched freely in the United States, or what happened on January 6th, etc. These are also radicals marching, coming from the right wing. You can see all the neo-Nazi parades in the Europe. He apparently is blind to all of that. But nevertheless, he is against free trade, and he is also against compassionate foreign policies of accommodating migrants. But he's also surprisingly revisionist, like China, Russia, and Iran. He actually said the post-war, and he means the post-Cold War, global order is not just obsolete. It's not just obsolete, it's now a weapon being used against us. I find it, who is using the global order against us? It is the United States which is still able to weaponize the international system as manifest in its response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The US weaponized every element of the international order to try and punish Russia. But anyway, he says the post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is now a weapon being used against us. And then he talks about various countries without naming them. And he says, and instead of folding to the post-Cold War global order, many countries have manipulated it to serve their interests at the expense of ours. This is where he completely converges with Donald Trump, where he believes that the international order has been unfair to the United States while the US continues to invest in maintaining a global order. There are free riders all over the world who have been exploiting the United States using the same global order. There have been lots of Republican presidents too since 1991, namely George Bush 1, George Bush 2, Donald Trump 1. Did they also support this liberal order? And then he says, we welcome the Chinese Communist Party into this global order, and they took advantage of all its benefits, but they ignored all its obligations and responsibilities. I really would love to know what are these obligations and these responsibilities that China has avoided in terms of global order. The United States does not allow any other power to have any say. Look at what happened in the Gaza war. Was any other country able to do anything at all? Even the United Nations was not allowed to intervene. So this assumption that China is able to do lots of things while abdicating on its responsibilities. I don't know what the designated that. Yes, China is a member of the UN Security Council, but so is France, so is Britain. What have they done? Then he says, instead of that, China has lied, cheated, hacked, and stolen their way to global superpower status at our expense. There, I agree with that, but those are not violations of the obligations of the international system. Many other countries do that too. So these are the four critical views. And then finally, this is where I find it very interesting. He concludes his testimony to the Senate by saying, 8 decades later, this is after the end of World War II, we are called to create a free world out of chaos once again. I wonder who is calling. Right now, the United States, everybody in the world other than Israel, would rather not have the United States playing any significant role in the world, or even the friends of the United States. Just a few days ago, Dr. Jaishankar gave a speech. His first speech in 2025, he gave it, I think, in Mumbai, where he said that the United States is about to withdraw from the international system, and he sees it as a positive. It gives space and opportunity for other countries to do something. But apparently he thinks that there is people out there clamoring for the United States to do something. Maybe it's the Europeans. And he says this will not be easy. So once again, he's now coming back to building an order. And it will be impossible without a strong and confident America that engages the world, putting our core national interests above all else once again. This is where I think there are such profound contradictions in his thinking. he says this is the US, the world is asking the United States to create a new world order, a free world order out of chaos. Well, that would mean free trade. That would mean free movement of people. But he's against all of that. But he wants to call it a free world. The second thing is that he says this is not possible with a strong, confident America that is putting its core national interests above all else. How can these two go together? For there to be a truly global order, it's important for world powers, great powers, to sacrifice their narrowly defined self-interest in the interest of a better world. Otherwise, you won't be able to create a world order that everybody appreciates. The alternative would be direct domination, and the US does not have the capacity anymore to dominate the world. And then, of course, he says that he has received a mandate from Donald Trump, and he says that the direction he has given for the conduct of our foreign policy is clear. Every dollar we spend, every program we fund, and every policy we pursue must be justified with the answer to three simple questions. Does it make America safe? Does it make America stronger? Does it make America more prosperous? Well, there is no question saying, does it make the world free? Does it bring a new world order to the world? Clearly, those questions are irrelevant for Donald Trump. So I think there is a lot of inconsistency and lack of clarity in Marco Rubio's thinking. He's going to probably go by public opinion, some instincts, religious and emotions, and of course the money that he has been taking. He probably is planning to run in 2028. He'll probably be running against J.D. Vance to win the primaries, and he probably is going to use this time to please certain lobbies so he can get a lot more money to run, because these days America doesn't have elections for the White House. We have auctions. You have to bring literally $1 billion or more. Kamala Harris spent $1.5 billion and lost the election. So Marco Rubio probably will need about $2 billion in 2028. So I'm not very sure there's going to be a well-defined grand strategy or national security. Plus, Donald Trump is already conducting foreign policy on his own, and he really doesn't care what Marco Rubio is going to do. So is Marco Rubio then going to be relevant at all as Secretary of State? I think on issues that matter to Donald Trump, he will do whatever he wants. And Marco Rubio will be just like a waiter or just a staffer who will basically execute anything and everything that Donald Trump wants. And remember, this time around, anybody who challenges him will be out of the door quickly. Vivek Ramaswamy found that out very quickly. He was going to be in charge of DOGE, which was going to fire many people in the federal government. It turned out that he was the first person to be fired. And that will happen to Marco Rubio if he takes even one step against what Donald Trump wants. Donald Trump had enough with rebellion in his first term. So that's not going to happen. So where will all these values and vision and ideology and worldview of Marco Rubio matter? They will matter on issues which Trump doesn't care about. So there will be lots of things that Trump doesn't care about. Trump will be focused primarily on domestic politics for a long time. So on those issues where Trump doesn't matter or Trump doesn't care, Marco Rubio's ideas and Marco Rubio's ideology and the money that Marco Rubio has taken from various lobbies will have an impact on US foreign policy. And so I think that is where we are at the moment. We will see, but I also feel that as we go along, it is quite possible that you will see these people, at least in the first year or two, completely put their own personal preferences aside and do whatever Donald Trump wants. And then maybe later on, they will probably become, when they feel more secure in their positions, will they try to pursue their own agenda through the US government. So I hope you found this my discussion of Marco Rubio useful. And I hope you find it thought-provoking. If you're professors, you're welcome to share this video in your classrooms. So until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Don't forget to subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and do share this video with your socio-political network. Take care.